Hi everyone, so like last video I'll be with you just to narrate some of these bits that I think you might find interesting or want a little insight on what I was doing. So here you can see I'm doing a bit more of the chimneys. There's only one type of chimney in this game at the time of making this video, which is the orange red brick one. So if you want to customize it with different colours, you have to put different stones on the outside, which is what I've done. Here I'm just adding a bit of the extra reinforcements, scaffolding, bracing, whatever you want to call it. I'm not an architect, so I don't know. But yeah, we're just adding the extra floor, and like some of the buildings, or a lot of the buildings in Yaysay, they're going to have overhangs, so the top floors are going to be a bit larger wall space than the lower, which provides a bit of an overhang area. So adding in these reinforcements, bracing the building. Again, I mentioned it last video, it's kind of, I'm just sort of doing it where I feel that the building would need a little bit more structure. So on corners and edges and larger spaces, I'd be putting those beams. And then they would be connecting to the outside of the house and help inform me on where to put the extra load-bearing parts. So here I'm just trying to work out the flooring. There is a snap to grid flooring, and then there's the more maneuverable flooring that doesn't snap to grid. So I did start off with the snap to grid flooring, which seems to work okay. I'm probably going to be doing a bit more of the custom flooring just because it does give a bit more flexibility. So like the majority of this build, I was also still working off the map that I used for the game. The most recent map was created in the game called Dungeon Alchemist. I had to think for a moment what that was. And I had that up on the screen next to me as I went through that. So here again, having another part that's a bit of an overhang and building into the neighbour's house as well as the adjoining residency of the inn. And then me just trying to work out the best way to make this work. So that house that it's actually touching, I'm going to probably redo that just a little bit, but in the game that's actually lived in by the cook, the chef of this inn. So all she has to do when she finishes is go out the back door of the kitchen and literally just walk to her front door, which is very, very close. So that way everyone who works at this inn permanently is pretty close. So you've got the innkeeper and his family live in the residency, which is the brown roofed building that's above the stables, and then you've got the chef or cook who lives in the house right next door. And they have wait staff who live in other locations in the city. For some of them it's their second job. So here again, just sort of working out windows and considering I want the windows to be a custom size to fit the floor plan. This is another reason why the freeform objects, the simple pieces of plaster, I'm just sort of arranging work really well in being able to make the windows whatever size I honestly want them to be. So even though you don't end up seeing those brown beams that I used in the floor to space out the rooms, I still wanted to put them down there because I hadn't decided yet how much of that interior that I was going to be doing. Here we're just building a bit more of the chimney on the second fireplace. I think in future I'm probably going to tweak when I do the taller parts of the fireplace to actually try to make it line up to, say, the peaks of roofs. Just something else I might do for the future. Here I think I was just trying to work out what exactly my next steps were going to be. Again, if I was going to do it more kind of just hinted at the interior, or if I was going to do a full interior. In the end, I sort of went a bit of both, where I ended up doing just the interior for one of the rooms. So again, I did change the floor plan just a little bit, but it's still pretty close to what the original one was. What I did do that was different is that front room that I ended up actually doing in detail. That was initially in the original floor plan, it just had 2 bunk beds in there. And the master kind of nice room, which is what that became was actually in the other side of the floor, where that little overhang is. But I changed it for a couple of reasons. One, when I actually started designing it, I was like, actually putting this into practice, it wouldn't be as nice of a room as I previously thought, because the roof does slant down a bit and be a bit cramped. It would still be a nice room because it has a fireplace, but some guests, they might prefer size over having a fireplace. And I thought that front room, some people would consider it a nicer room because it does overlook the street. It has a nicer view. But yeah, more scaffolding, and as you can see when I was doing the open areas, even if I don't end up doing interiors, doing the scaffolding and the beams and things like that on the inside still does help, because it means that you can see where the bits come outside, so the bits that you would see from the street, and it helps it kind of make it a bit more logical instead of appearing random. And just adding the doors, because I had decided that I'll at least do sort of a corridor. It's a very simple inn. They don't have fancy things like on the walls or anything. It's somewhere that if people do want to stay the night, they just pay the innkeeper and then they pick a room, go down the corridor, go get into the room and sleep. Most of the other small rooms, they just have a simple bunk bed and a space for guests to store their stuff. It's just the 2 rooms that actually have a little bit more in them. A bit more space. So on the rooms that I'm not doing any interiors, I just do this thing where I just put kind of like a fake window in, and I add a bit of depth so that I can put some things up right against the glass that again gives the illusion that there is a bit more going on in there. So sticking a candle or some flowers or something in front of the backlight does sort of give that nice sort of illusion that there is a bit more of a room in there than what there actually is. It'll save me a lot of memory space too when I end up doing a lot more of the city. So here just adding some curtains, again for some variety. Not all of the windows in the entire city are going to have lights on at night time. There'll be some that are, there's no one home, or they've turned the lights off, or they've got curtains drawn. Just little things to kind of try to make the place look a little bit more realistic and feel a bit more alive once it's finished. That's me just trying to see how it looks at night time. So placing the kind of timeline of when this place would be, or the technology level of this, is a bit difficult, because in some ways they've got a lot of technology that's probably 19th century, and in other ways maybe not. So this is a fantasy place in the end, and so yeah, it's not like we're dealing with 13th century medieval. They've got plumbing, they've got glass, detailed glass work, fine metal work to a certain extent. So trying to have the city sort of resemble that a little bit. So it's got some definite creature comforts. So adding these little details to the roof, it's just also helping me kind of decide how I'm going to do the other houses I did in the background, which is why the video on that was a bit shorter and not as detailed. I will be going over the other neighbourhood houses, fixing up the roofs, and then I'll be cut pasting that and then making some alterations to make the houses look a bit different to each other. So in here you can see how I'm lining up where the wood to kind of the skeleton of the room, I guess I'm trying to say. So to make it logical and make sense, when they're building the house or the inn, they'd be lining up those beams in the roof, I guess, with the beams on the side. So when you see all the wooden beams on the outside against the plaster, that kind of Tudor style, my logic is that I wanted to kind of make sense of how it works, not just have random beams in the plaster, that they're actually there for support the building to keep it all upright and sturdy. Sometimes it's not even, but at least, try to make it make sense. So they would line up at, say, where the peak of the roof is. They'd line up where room corners are. They'd line up where, say, especially a big window, because a large window would, want that to be structurally sound. There is a lot of me also just making this up as I go along and just doing it to the point that to me it seems like it works and fits and makes sense and doesn't look weird. But I'm very aware that someone who actually understands architecture and building will probably see a lot of flaws in what I'm doing. I'm just doing this to kind of have fun and because I enjoy it. Section I'm working on here was a little bit fiddly to try to work out how the roof would work, both in terms of mechanically getting it working in the game as well as just making it make sense, because I imagine that it would generally you wouldn't have a building built right up against another neighbouring building like this, but again I did mention that the cook lives in that house, so I figured perhaps at the time that these buildings were built that maybe they did build them so that they were designed to be very close to each other and kind of built into each other. Not all the buildings will be like this though. In fact, I would actually say it would be quite rare that would be the case, as you'd probably want a bit more space between buildings. If anything, it would also be a fire hazard. I imagine things being too close. If there was a fire, it would just jump too quickly to the neighbouring property. Yeah, the great thing about this game is it is, as you can see, heavily customisable. You can do so much with the pieces. It's really just be quite creative with it. So again, because I haven't done the interior of this room, I'm just putting enough in there to make it from the window to make it look like there's a bit more in there from the street. Again, more bracing, more scaffolding will be needed to hold up the supports for that room, that overhang, so that it doesn't, eventually fall down. More details, a bit more grime. These areas I imagine would be a bit more difficult to clean. So there'd be a little bit more wear and tear compared to the other areas that are a bit more easier to reach. Storage right on the street there means it's a lot easier for supplies to come in. I didn't narrate the very part one of this three-parter videos, but there's the double doors on the other side of the kitchen, which is also where supplies will be dropped off, so it's very easy for wagons to kind of back up and supply things, because I had imagined that barrels full of wine and beer and ale or whatever that they're stocking this in with, they're heavy. They'd roll them in there, but yeah, I'd imagine that for buildings like this, they'd want to make it as easy as possible to supply the place. I was going to do a little veggie herb garden there, but I changed my mind. I'm just fixing up a few more details now. More details, and again, like mentioned in the last video, that hanging lights from those structure beams is something to me that to me made a bit more sense. Plaster, even in today, is not exactly sound, so when you are hanging up something from a wall or a ceiling, it's not a great idea to secure it just to the plaster. If you can, it's better to try and see if you can secure it into the actual beams. I imagine it would be the same logic for here. Don't try to hang your lights from the plaster and expect it not to drop out of the plaster at some point. So here, building another asset, just like the armchairs and tables and all those other things downstairs. We don't have beds in this game, so I'm building it from scratch. It's not going to look perfect, but the aim is for it to look like a decent bed. So that you could at least have a quick look at it and go, that looks like a bed. What would be even better would be if they could allow you in this game to shrink or enlarge these pieces, I think. If it's already a game that's pretty creative and allows for customization, being able to shrink pieces would just make that a million times more customizable. We could do so much if we could change the shapes of these pieces. Yeah, it's not perfect, it looks a little lumpy, but again, hopefully it still looks like a decent bed, and maybe we can just argue that this is just a very fluffy, comfy looking bed, I hope. Then we can explain the shine by saying maybe it's got satin sheets, it's fancy, this room. I think it turned out okay in the end, in all honesty. Alright, making a dresser now. Storage, like I said, this room's a bit more fancy. You've got a little bit more creature comforts in here. I will also change different artworks. I'll find some more artworks that I can install into the game to make these custom frames and pictures going on walls. Might try and do some that look like sketches or things like that. I think I ended up saving these as a blueprint, but if I haven't, I'll probably use them again in the future just for other buildings that I do interiors for. The vast majority of buildings in this place, this city, are not going to be having interiors. That's just too much for me, but I will probably do interiors for, say, key locations or locations that you can have access or visible access from the street or see into it from the street. Another thing that would be fantastic is if these rugs could be edited a bit better, like maybe like you install your own image or something. A bit of shelving. The person stays in this room a little bit long term. They can put some things on there, have some coat hooks. They can hang a bag, hang a jacket from the hooks there. I'm hoping, I haven't worked it out if I can turn the candles off in the game, because then I can, some of the rooms could have no candles lit, but bit of safety, don't light a candle and leave it unattended, but these guys are being a little bit unsafe. They're leaving their candles lit while not in the room. So trying to make a bit more of a smaller chair here, a chair that's not quite like the ones downstairs, using a drum and other little bits and pieces. I think I get there in the end, but try to, if I come up with a better way, then